episode. And I will say hello. I am Andrea Goeglein. And with me today is someone who I met when I first came to Las Vegas because I had a specific need. I don't remember how she came into my life, but I remembered she was recommended to me. Alice Strauss was recommended to me as a Reiki teacher at that time. I came to Las Vegas with a need. I wanted to make sure I could continue to get Reiki treatments, which are a form of energy work. More about that in a moment. Alice, welcome.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's so nice to see you physically once again.
Do you have any recollection of how I found you initially?
Y yes, it was in the lakes not the lakes,
Yeah, the late 90s.
Desert Shore. I was a yoga teacher slash instructor teaching spiritual aspects of yoga at that little, not little, it's quite large center. They had massage, shiatsu, Reiki, um,
Great.
all that kind of stuff. And you had an office upstairs and you said you
Okay.
somehow heard about it and you came downstairs and said, I'd like to meet you and work with you. And that's how it started. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I thought I actually met you a little bit earlier than that.
Might have been, but that's what I remember.
Yeah, I do remember you. I think I actually met you earlier because the first sessions that I came to, I don't know whether this was legally, but I remembered Richard went to you and he was still at the Aladdin. Yes, I met you a lot. You were doing
That
service in your home.
that's right. That's right.
That's
So
why I
even
can't remember
before.
how I met you.
Yeah, yeah, that's even before. Because I've had many offices in town since then,
Yeah.
different areas for
So
different reasons.
let me just preface why I'm doing this conversation. There's 100 reasons. Alice and I, thanks to technology, even though we only live 10 miles apart from each other, really have not seen each other in physical form since our Still Point days, which I think easily would have been 7 or 8 years ago was the last time that I physically saw you, even though we live in the same community. But yet, I have been on a crusade of sorts in recent vintage to help people understand all the kinds of things I do to keep my mind, my body, my soul healthy. And I've always had an attraction to alternative practices in energy. And it's because, I spent 12 years in California. I've got to blame it on that dark cloud over California that everybody wants to blame. Yes, it introduced me to things I thought were crazy. And one of them was energy work, Reiki. Would you just tell our audience, because I know you started out there with your yoga, what is Reiki? What is that about?
Yeah, Reiki is energy work that a practitioner would do on a person. Unlike massage, where you don't necessarily touch the body, you lie down or even you sit down, and the practitioner will then you move their hand up and down the body, and they will sense hot spots where the energy is stuck. That's why the energy is kind of building up there, and then
Mhm.
they will go from there and tell you different areas. And sometimes they work with the energy centers called the chakras,
Right.
which are 7 spots in the body energetically that in Asia is talked about all the time and
And
used.
that comes out of the Hindi tradition, the chakras originally.
Yeah,
Is
because
that correct?
yoga comes from that thing, and from that mindset
That's
and
school.
belief
That's
system.
school of
Yeah,
thought.
healing system. And then at some point, my husband and I were living in Japan for a number of years, and I wanted to learn body work, acupressure, but I didn't like the needles. So I went into the acupuncture I didn't care for. So I went into the acupressure side where you use your hands. And then from there, I learned shiatsu, which is a combination of acupressure and a little bit of body stretching, kind of like um, very relaxed yoga asanas or stretches, but the practitioner does it for you. You kind of lay there and they just pull your leg a little bit or your arm or move your head, and then the pressure points. But then I got into different studies and decided to become an educator in it. So I got certified and did all that stuff.
But
So,
Alice, I want to pause you a moment because I
mhm,
want people to understand how um, a person like myself,
yeah.
who was quite the hyper trained critical thinker, I'm remembering as you're speaking how I got introduced And it had everything to do with the psychology of having a personality that wants to be good to my friends. And I had a friend who had a massage uh, company in Yountville. His name is Will Anderson. And Will was the first person to introduce me to Reiki. And I was like, really? This is like crazy stuff. But I was attracted by the fact I didn't have to take my clothes off and I really wasn't going to get touched. And my hands were just, and they were just going to tell me where there were blockages. I knew nothing about this because I thought I was no, I didn't think I was a bull in the china closet. I was a bull in the china closet. And I was like, okay, go for it. But I really began to appreciate that although I didn't understand it, it wasn't scientific, there was something about feeling better after I would do that. And then I had a really interesting experience. Again, because I was a good friend, Will asked me to be a subject for people he was training. And there was this one particular man who wanted to create a practice to help veterans. So I thought, well, that's a really good cause. I'll be more than willing to help him get his hours. Now, I don't have a small personality. I say gently about myself.
But it's great.
This man was so nervous while he was attempting to do use me as his subject that I literally left the session with anxious energy it was like noticeable. And I went to my friend Will and I said, okay, I can't be anyone's subject. I need someone who's confident. I can't because I've got a personality that's going to come up against them, even when I'm trying to relax. And so that instance actually gave me a degree of belief. Like I had an experience that said, I may not understand this, but I've had a positive experience. And then I've had this other experience that I wouldn't be repeating twice. So I want, we're talking about something that is experiential.
Yes.
And your willingness, you'll talk in a little bit about the mind-body connection, your willingness, like I was willing to be helpful, but then I got a little bit of information that said, ooh, not going to let that person near me again. So you were in Japan and you were expanding your practice and your information and you began to teach.
Yes, yes. And then I eventually came back to the United States and opened up a school to certify yoga teachers and energy workers. And so that went on for a number of years, and I did different types of workshops, and I got into the mind body and worked with what I call symptomology. You tell me your symptoms, physical symptoms,
Right.
and I'll tell you which energy center in the chakras, because all the chakras have life lessons we're supposed to be learning, different parts and different ways, different eras of our life.
And this has been passed down through various spiritual traditions,
Oh, for
not
thousands
through
of,
science. Got
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But now, because I go to a lot of scientific, especially neurology workshops, now they're finding, oh, this isn't just kind of some Asian kind of mythology that we're into. There's scientific proof about the energies in the body and etc. So when I was in Japan before I left and I did the acupressure studies and certification and got certified to actually teach it back here, I started looking at the meridians, the energy meridians, the lines in the body that the acupuncturists or acupressurists put either needles or their thumb pressure on.
Right.
And in Asia specifically, it's about finding the emotion because every organ, like the liver, is connected to anger,
Okay.
kidney to fear, the heart to a sense of what does love mean for you. So there's always an emotional, spiritual component to all of the energy lines. So I learned all those in Japan. And here you do a bit, I think the acupressurists and puncturists do a little bit of that, but not, I really got fully into connecting what life lessons from the chakras I
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuck at, and what emotion have you been having the most difficult time with that issue, stuckness, if you will. And
Right.
then I used, again, a more spiritual kind of mind healing, meaning it's more about finding the soul level truth, not the spirit. The spirit is our energy, how we're feeling today, good energy, bad energy, good
Right.
spirit, not so good spirit. It's soul level, like what the soul has been attempting through our issues to show us this is why you're having the issue. This is where you're kind of stuck.
Hmm.
So that's what I've been doing the last probably 10 or 15 years. Um,
And how do you attract clients today?
I've never used, no, I take that back. I have used, advertising through papers and TV and all that
Yeah.
stuff years ago, and it really didn't get much movement at all.
No.
It's now all referral from
Yeah.
past clients or friends or.
Because I've got to say, it is so hard. I had another individual that by the name of Jeffrey Noble on one of these
Yeah, yeah,
conversations
yes.
recently, and I told the story. I was attracted to Jeffrey's work because I had a friend who physically showed up looking lighter, just not as burdened over dinner, and I thought, oh, what's that? So I definitely have an appreciation and I'm not afraid of exploring it. And I don't tie any mystical or religious things to it because there is this, and, there's a few billion people in the world who this was the only thing they were brought up to know.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. But I've always appreciated that about you, Andrea, is that you just have this kind of like honing in energy. You know where some new experiencing mindset or philosophy is coming out, and then you explore it. I think that's fantastic. I've always appreciated
Yeah.
that.
And, one of the many reasons, you came into my life almost 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know how your practice, because of my work with the Angel's Edge and being so enamored with the difference of the way people pass through and how the skills we learn in our 20s and 30s and 40s become the skills that really either help us in our 60s, 70s, and beyond, or not so good. And your work has spanned this body and it keeps evolving
Hmm.
and evolving. What are you excited about in your work now?
So I think the last few years, I was doing some work with Scripps Hospital and contracted to
Yes.
do some work, conscious leadership for the leadership, the upper echelon. And a lot of the not complaints, but comments that women would make to me, very intelligent, educated women, would come to me after or during the break, and we'd have, time to just chit chat a little bit about how they felt they though they had good jobs, they felt less somehow empowered personally and career-wise than they had expected when they moved into those positions, those higher up positions. So that really piqued my curiosity. So since then, that was about I think the contract ended about 8 years ago. I've
Yeah.
been doing research on women's empowerment, but I know that's already out there. So the terminology is even rather trite.
Right.
But so what I'm really about now is sort of, I guess I call myself an energy educator and a solutions therapist. Soul meaning capital SOUL dash tiny UT, solution
Mm-hmm.
to work with the soul, the soul level truth of what so many women, because I work mostly with women now, used to work with both half and half, but now women on how they've lost a sense of their soul level truth by trying to, maybe they were divorced or lost their
Mm-hmm.
husband, so they have to take care of the kids themselves, and financially they're very, very overwhelmed, and they've moved up in their careers, but they lose a piece of themselves. And that's what I was hearing a lot. They lose a piece of themselves. And I don't mean like empowerment by being powerful over someone
Right.
or being the boss of someone, but the impersonal, empowered, almost empoweredness that they sense they lost when they were so, kind of um, active in moving up in order to be financially more stable without their men. There are a lot of women out there that are single, so
You
that's what
know,
I'm working
and I
now.
do know that within the behavioral sciences, there's a piece of literature, I think it was written about in Harvard Business about 15 years ago, called The End of the History Illusion. And it spoke specifically about setting long-term goals and how when a person sets a goal, they're actually living one life physically, mentally, whatever they're doing. And by the time they achieve the long-term goal, they're no longer the same person. So they assign a dissatisfaction with the attaining the
Yes,
goal, when in fact, what has happened is they've continued to change and evolve. And I think that happens so much in, you know, as you and I were chatting before this, I had interviewed a romance fantasy writer this week. And she basically said, what people want is fantasy. It's too hard to face the real stuff. And I think that we do that a lot in our lives. We dress up what the next thing we'll get can be. And I think your work with helping them focus at any point in time on who is the person that wants that goal? Where does that desire come from?
yes. Hmm.
That is far more helpful.
And sometimes the women are very surprised at what the inner part of themselves has to say when they're trusting themselves enough to go inside,
Yeah.
deep within, and look at that soul level truth. They're surprised. None of them have decided at this point, as far as I know, to leave the corporate world,
Right.
but they're doing it differently now. When they come in, when I see them, they walk differently, they stand differently. They're like your friend, lighter.
Yeah.
And not because of me, it's just
Oh,
what I've learned how to teach and share with the world. So I think I'm very much about being a consciousness raising type of counselor, coach, whatever. I've got licensing and stuff, but whatever you want to call me, because everybody calls me something different, my type.
uh-huh.
But it's more about being conscious of what's really inside there. Why do you, aside from the finances, what were you looking for to, and sometimes it was a sense of control or a sense of I don't have to rely on someone else to take care of my family and myself. Or sometimes it was kind of an inflated ego in a way. So there was all kinds of things that come up underneath that is a great goal to keep moving forward and evolving financially,
Yeah.
productively, creatively, all that. Unless you're feeling like many of them were, something is missing. And then we go back in again and look at what that was. So then they identify it and then add it to the work that they're doing.
Yeah. And Alice, I know that you suffered an unexpected loss. Would you talk about that and how that has continued to inform your life at this point?
Yes. About a little over 2 years ago, my husband passed away suddenly. I mean, within 10 days. So to me, that's sudden
Yeah.
compared to some of my friends and family members.
You bet.
Prolonged illnesses. So it was rather quick and short. And for the first, I would say 9 months, maybe even to a year, I was like, who do I talk to about my next book? Like I was starting another book. Where do I get this support? Because we had been married for 57 years when he passed. And so it's stabilizing in some sense, stabilizing who my soul came into this life to be and to fulfill
Mhm.
that, and yet sort of unstable in the sense that I don't have that constant support, that person that kind of stands behind me and cheers me on or moves me on or gives me suggestions. So that's been a really, really difficult a challenge for me. But the first year was the most challenging, and I would say now the second one was a little bit easier, and then third. But it's given me also this kind of freedom. And other women that have had husbands, their spouses pass, have said the same thing. There's this kind of freedom that comes with it, and I don't mean freedom. Oh, we're not
No,
married to that person. That's not what I'm
right.
addressing here. It's a personal freedom to allow the soul truth because I've always done certain things and my husband's always agreed with it. But now I'm doing things that perhaps my husband, knowing him so well, might not think was such a great idea. So that's what I mean by
Yeah.
independent kind of freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, it opens up possibilities
Mm.
that weren't there before if you're willing. You know, this is the whole thing about the ageless edge. It is the willingness, and I think that's what goes to your work so much. How the mind and the body and the soul are all connected. These aren't freestanding agents because we can't really, I mean, sure, we can identify the body. And we know, you know, theoretically the placement of where we think the mind is. But boy, when you start working with it at the level that you do, it's a very different conversation. And it is very much about how do I react to this situation. And I'll tell you, you know, many years ago, my dad had a very serious illness at 80 years old, and it took him, you know, 8 or 9 months to recover. He was actually here in Las Vegas. But one of the interesting things was the 60-year-old doctor who took care of him beautifully um, walked into a Rotary meeting and died like 6 months after my dad was now getting healthy because of him. And I remembered his wife, who was a friend, said to me that the first year, you're doing so much. There's so much that has to happen because that person suddenly left your life that you're busy with those activities. And then the second year, you begin to really realize, oh, they're not coming back.
Yes.
And I have to get used to what this is. And it sounds to me you're now at that point where I know the word freedom is such, but I would say the opening, there appears to be another set of openings that can
Mhm.
occur.
And one of the last things he said to me before he went into sort of a coma for a couple of days was two things. He said, the book, because I just started writing another book, the book. And I said, you know, just like, oh, okay. And then he said, maybe 2 hours or so later, before he never spoke again, was keep doing what you're doing. And I had started having different ideas about where I wanted to work with people, but just before he
Yes.
got sick and then passed suddenly.
Yes.
Whoa. Because I knew when he was sleeping, he wasn't really sleeping because occasionally he'd like say like, oh, like he was getting something, getting an
Yes.
insight. He was
Yes.
getting close to death and he knew it. And he was getting information about things. And, you know, I was rather startled with those two comments, but those are the
Yeah.
last things he said. So and I think he knows. I feel his consciousness around me sometimes. I think he knows that what I'm doing now is a little different from the typical yoga and the meditation that I've always done in classes, but now it's a little deeper than that, a little more personalized,
Yes.
and yet having the need to change our society and like a paradigm shift in society. That's
Okay.
kind of where I'm. And maybe the year before he left, he would say, "Wow, that's kind of like deep. That's that. You sure you want to go in that direction?" Yeah, I
Hmm.
think so. But so we would not arguments or disagreements, but just like,
No.
whoa, wow, that's
Yeah.
pretty heavy. So I'm moving in that direction. So that's a kind of
That's great.
freedom. Not that if he would have said no, absolutely not, you can't do it. I refuse it. I would have done it anyway. But
Sure.
it's just nice to know now that prior to his
Exactly.
passing, he knew a lot more than he did when he was in the basic physical form, and kind of supported that what I
Interesting.
was doing.
That's
Yeah.
great. Well, I love that. You know, is there anything that you would like to say to complete? I feel that what you've just said gives us so much of, you know, that I've had many conversations about those small moments when a piece of information is given to you. And the difference between following it is not as whether or not you've heard it. And I feel you heard it,
Mm-hmm.
paused long enough to hear it, and even think through, oh, you know, if he had said something else, I probably would have like done it the other way. That is like I feel you have gone through the process of, does what he said to me fit how I see myself?
Mm-hmm.
And it
Yeah.
seems to be for now, the answer is yes.
Yeah. 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 And so with the work that I'm still doing, but a little bit less right now because I'm writing so busy and involved in the writing, but to find out the life lessons for people and then the emotions that are kind of stuck around that whole thing. That to me is something so concrete because I've studied all kinds of healing energy modalities,
Uh-huh.
reflexology, and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, um, that to me is so profoundly real for people. Like I knew that my liver enzymes were out of place because I've been so angry and I
Right.
didn't want to tell my husband because or whoever
Right.
to allow them to now express kind of what they've been feeling all along. So that to me is where I've gotten the most, I think, confidence and the
Great.
ability to keep opening and going deeper and evolving in my spiritual time on this earth.
Thank you. Well, Alice, I will make sure that your website is that still the most current way to get in touch with you.
Yes, yes,
Beautiful. I will make sure that that is in your notes. And I love the fact that we maybe, don't get to see each other in the same environment, but through technology and through our mutual interest as we move around the world, we still, the newsletters that you write, I know you've always been fabulous about commenting on my work throughout the years, and I've always deeply appreciated that. So I love that we've had this time together today, and I cannot wait to see how your work continues to evolve.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And again, I'm always watching what you're doing and really proud of you and support everything that you do. So thank you again
Thank
for
you.
inviting me. It
All
was
right.
great.
I am Andrea Goeglein. I will make sure that Alice's website is in the notes of this video. And as always, your comments are welcome as long as they are respectful. Thank you.